Hello and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Jeff Fool. And I'm Joe Lallo.
And we have a return guest for you this week, Becca Andre. Although if you haven't been listening to the podcast for a super long time, you may not remember her. She was one of our first guests back on episode 23. And that was more than 3 years ago, but we thought we would get an update on how things are going for her. She's finished up she has an urban dark fantasy final formula series, and now she's kind of switched to a steampunk historical fantasy series called Iron Souls. And we're going to ask her kind of how it works switching from one subgenre of fantasy to another, and also about writing historical fantasy, as we haven't had too many authors on here that are kind of working in that subgenre. And I found kind of from watching that it can be a difficult one to do well in. It seems like your readers have to not only be willing to read alternative history, fantasy, but they kind of have to be a fan of whatever specific time period and place you choose to put your stories in. So we're going to ask her all about that. Hi, Becca. Welcome, and thanks for joining us again.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
I tried to sum up a bit there, but why don't you give us your interpretation of what you've been up to the last 3 years?
Sure. Well, like you said, I finished my final formula series, which was urban fantasy, dark fantasy. It is a contemporary thing set in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I've always had an inkling to write something kind of steampunk-like, although technically steampunk is science fiction where this is fantasy. But I was trying to find something unique to my area where I live. I didn't feel comfortable setting a story in London. I mean, what do I know about London? So I thought, well, what's unique here about Ohio during the late 1800s? And I thought the canals. You know, we had the canal boats. They were these, boats. They actually didn't have any power on them. They were pulled by horses or mules. I mean, it's very backwoodsy kind of stuff. And I can't say as I'd ever read a book about them, as far as fiction goes. So I decided to give that a go, and that's the time period that I set my story in, and kind of took off from there. I'm doing the Ohio and Erie Canal, which runs from Portsmouth, Ohio to Cleveland, Ohio. And I thought it's kind of to set up the story, it would be the journey over the whole length of the canal. Which, of course, then I got to actually come up with something going on the boat, which is a little tougher to do. But so that was kind of the framework for it. I don't know where else I can go with this. I was worried at first about switching subgenres, I guess we could call it. It's quite different from, what I wrote before, which is contemporary. The historical aspect I find really interesting. I've always liked history. Probably some of my favorite books to read would have been Jane Austen, which is even further back. But I don't know. I've always just kind of had a hankering to write something in that area. So it's kind of the inspiration behind it. But I've been really pleased with the fans followed me and really seem to like it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, you're actually kind of in my wheelhouse with this because I loved before I even found fantasy as a kid, I just read all these kind of frontier America, Davy Crockett, women being kidnapped by Indians. There were tons of those books back in the day, back when you could call them Indians. And so I enjoyed that. And it's funny that so many people do choose like London for the steampunk setting that also probably have not spent much time there and aren't familiar with it. So it makes sense to do a setting. You could even, did you do any road trips out and visit any, do they have any of the locks still on there?
Oh yeah. I live within about 1.5 miles from the canal bed, and we've got 3 or 4 locks within just a few miles of where I live. Several of them have been restored. One of them's even like a historical marker type of thing. You can get out, park your car, get down and walk through it, that kind of thing. I haven't been to them yet. By the time I finish the series, maybe I'll make it there. But they actually have some of the replica canal boats up in the northern part of the state, or northern to me, since I'm in the southern part. But Roscoe Village is one, and it's just an entire canal town that they have redone, all kinds of displays and, the different buildings. And they also have a canal boat that you can take a ride on, which would just be awesome. But like I said, I'll probably get to that after I'm done with the series. I'm a little slow here. But lately, anytime we go on a road trip and we're following the route of the canal, we'll kind of go out of our way to see the different parts of it and such. That's really cool. I've had a lot of fun with it.
And you mentioned that it sounds like some of your fans from the first series, which did well, and we'll talk about you were wide with those books and switched to KU. We'll get into the marketing stuff in a bit, but I'm curious what the response was from your regular readers. Were they willing to go back in history, a lot of them, or do you feel like some of them just said, "Nah, I'm sorry, it's not for me"?
I feel like a lot of them joined me. Initially, I had several like emails, comments, things like that. People saying, "Yeah, I don't know if this is for me," that kind of thing. But they gave it a chance, and it was some folks that come back and said they like it even better than the others. So, yay!
It's always a great thing to hear when you're taking a chance with a new genre.
Yes.
So one of the things I notice is certain genres tend to attract an audience that expects a little bit more accuracy than other genres. Like you'll get a lot more people reading sci-fi who might nitpick the way you're using science. Does historical fantasy strike you as a kind of thing where you might have people telling you that's not how things were, even though it's supposed to be fantasy?
I have heard that, especially with regard to just straight up historical fiction in general, that people are really picky. And to be honest, that was part of the reason I chose to set it where I did, as opposed to writing about historic London, which I know nothing about. This I know just a little bit more about. And it's kind of funny. I know there's a lot of people out there that, Lindsay, for example, I had to explain to her what a canal boat was when I first introduced her to the series. Yet they'd never even heard of the things. So I've kind of got a little bit of leeway there as far as people not being super knowledgeable about it. But I'm picky. I've got to have it right. And I've studied, and that's the other thing. It's such an obscure area. It's hard to find stuff on it. And I've researched and researched. I end up just buying books with old pictures and just sitting studying the pictures, trying to figure out, okay, if you're coming at it from this angle, how would it look? What would, and just all kinds of details. So yes, I'm picky. So far, I haven't had people yell at me, but I'm sure there'll be a case.
Yeah, you'll always run into somebody, and they'll pick something in there that you actually made up and tell you that it was wrong.
Right.
It's funny that this might end up, number one, readers of this book might end up developing an interest in it, but he also you might end up being the weird sort of authority in this.
Yes.
And the other thing that's kind of funny is, again, when people nitpick, I wrote a story that's a steampunk story, and in it there's a creature called an eye. It is one of the only things in it that I did not make up. They actually exist, and that's the only thing I got complimented on. But that's such an imaginative creature, the eye.
Awesome.
So maybe you'll get a bunch of those where it's like, man, this whole canal thing, that's really creative.
Yeah, truly.
All right, so my question for you is, for those authors who might be thinking about dipping their toe in the historical fantasy water, what would you say are some common tropes that should be included if they're going to actually give it a try?
Yeah, you're assuming that I've studied this thing. Honestly, I am so just seat of my pants kind of, I get an idea and I run with it. I studied a lot of the history itself is what gave me the ideas for the story. If I get stuck on what happens next, I'll kind of, like I said, to me it was the journey, the whole length of the canal. I'll see, well, what's coming up next? What's my, a unique setting I can use? Honestly, I really don't know how to answer that, because I really.
Well, let me ask you this: how much research did you do for all this?
Lots and lots. I've bought loads of books on the canal itself. I try to get out at least in the area and see the different structures and figure out how they worked, and how did they lock through a lock? How did the gates work? Just all those different little details, which probably don't even show up in the book, but at least in my mind, I know what's going on. So.
Now, were you tempted at all? I've actually, since I've read these, I know the answer, but if you pick a certain year, were you tempted to put things in that were happening in that year, or Did you just want to like kind of pretend? I know you mentioned the trains kind of being developed at that time period out west, but did you decide, conscious decision to avoid like political events that were going on then?
Well, I'll have to confess here, in all my stories, I try to keep things as loose as possible because like, I'm such a seat of my pants kind of writer that I never know when I'm going to use something. There's a little throwaway line in a book somewhere that becomes important. So I do not, if I can, avoid it. I don't set an exact year. I've kind of got maybe a decade, maybe say 1880s is probably when these are set, but I don't really nail it down because I like to give myself that out if I need it.
Yeah, I did the same thing with my little Flash Gold, was a steampunk series set in the Yukon during the gold rush. So it was kind of specific, and I had to look up which year of Winchester rifle they would have had back then. But yeah, I think that if you get into the historical stuff,
Yes.
and, you know, some people really enjoy that, incorporating that, but yours almost has almost that out west feel, even though Ohio is not very west. But at that time period, yeah, Midwest. I love you guys back east. Out west, we're like, well, there's so much more west the Mississippi. You can't call that the Midwest. But anyway, so I'm curious about, you know, like for those that might want to try historical fantasy and are worried they don't know, I know you're not really a right to market kind of person. Are there any tropes that you're aware of or things that people are going to expect that readers will expect that, I mean, I know you've got a kind of a romance going on and that's a different bit of a different thing in there that will keep people reading, but do you feel like people come into this with expectations you have to meet?
I'm sure they do, and as we just talked about, a big part of it is having the historical aspects correct. Beyond that, you know, what I write seems to work, so, you know, I must be meeting them. I'm sorry, but you know, I just write and, hey, look, this is what I wrote. I'll stick it in this category. So yeah, I'm a real research heavy kind of gal over here with the marketing into things.
No, that's okay. I actually feel like we're pretty similar in that it's kind of character driven and
Yes.
you're worrying more about that and having conflict between the characters than so much about external events. We should ask you, what is the fantasy element that you've incorporated into your stories?
In this particular case, I wanted to, you know, to me, the natural conflict here was between the canals and the railroads. That really existed. So when I set up my story, of course, my main character, she's going to be a canal boat captain, and I've got to have romance in my story. So at least in the first book, your antagonist, the love interest, he's going to be with the railroad. And I wanted to do something, like I said, kind of steampunky as far as with, you know, not so much a lot of gadgets or anything like that, but a little bit of advanced technology in this world of, you know, mule-pulled boats. And so to do that, I decided to go with kind of magical metallurgy. So he has the ability to, you know, basically do magic with metals, which gives him the ability to have advanced technologies that didn't exist at the time. So there's a little bit of that in there, but it's not real heavy on that. But that's where the magical aspect came in. And some folks have, you know, praised me on it being unique. So, you know, I did something okay in that regard, but I've had a lot of fun with that end of it too. So that is kind of the magic side of it. Whereas the rest of it is, you know, the canal boats, the everyday, the history. So it is just a mix up of different things.
All right. So this is sort of another audience question. There are certain genres that you mentioned steampunk and how like people sort of expect it to be Victorian England specifically, and like they'll knock off a star from your thing where it's like, well, this is a great book, but it's not really steampunk because it wasn't in Victorian England. Like, and you sort of mentioned that you didn't do a tremendous amount of research into this, but let's say, for example, and I don't know for sure, but let's say that historical fantasy, 85% of the books in there are like, you know, Highlander, Scotland type stuff or Arthurian legend type stuff. Did you take any specific steps to try to make sure, like with your blurb and cover, that people were setting their expectations correctly for what flavor of historical was going to be in there?
Yeah, I mentioned in the blurb that it's set on the Ohio and Erie Canal, which to me is kind of a little bit of a draw as far as uniqueness. And, for something a little bit different, I tried to make that clear. But, mainly from there, I just go with the story. That to me, that is the big draw on, what you read. But yes, absolutely. I tried to make it, within the blurb, the cover, I try to reflect. Actually, I got the canal boats on the covers. And the characters are dressed appropriately, for the time period, those sorts of things. I try to give lots of clues as to, what it's all about in that regard.
Yeah, that's good. And it's a thing I find very interesting about historic fantasy in particular. Even if it was just steampunk, which is always sort of set in the turn of the century or 1880s, that range, Victorian. You can go anywhere in the world and have a really distinct, different period that is Victorian era. And it's sort of interesting to we know the Wild West was taking place during that time. And we know what Victorian England is like. It's sort of interesting to be like, even different places in America have their own sort of flavor at that stage of time. I don't know. I feel like historical fantasy is, if it catches on more, is going to have to subdivide a lot, because if there is an audience expectation problem, this is one where it's going to be like, well, this is Midwest 1880s historical fantasy.
Oh yeah. That's what I kind of another angle I took here was to pick. It's the same time period, but we've got the canals as opposed to the Wild West, which does have a lot of steampunk. Books set in the Wild West or Victorian England. So it is the same time period, believe it or not. So it's kind of neat.
Let's see. You pretty much addressed my next question, so I've got a new one for you. Is there anything you've learned since you released your first novel that you're doing now that you wish you would have done then when you first started your writing career?
Well, with the first one, the way I set it up and what took me so long to kind of get all the way through that series, I that
seems to be the norm for everybody. The first book always takes the longest.
Yes, it does. And I set up my first series where the main stories was, a particular character's point of view was first person. And then I did novellas in between each of the main novels from another character's point of view, which was third person. And as the series went on, actually the novellas got longer and the last two were novel length. But looking back, I kind of wish I hadn't set it up that way or made them their own books, their own series, is something, because it ended up being 9 books, which took me forever to get through. I just started publishing my Iron Soul series this year. And you guys talked to me 3 years ago when I was writing the final formula. So it's taken me this long to get that sucker finished. And so, all I've got is one first book. So I have nothing really to advertise other than that one series. So if I could do it again, I'd make stuff shorter, the book shorter, the series is shorter, so I can have more series.
Well, let me ask you this. If you considered yourself better organized, how long should it take you to write one of your novels?
Nowadays, I'm trying to get one out every 3 months. So I also work full time, so I've got a bit of a time sink in that regard. But I'm really proud of myself lately here being able to turn one every 3 months. I think the last final formula book, which was a huge book, but it took me 8 months to write the darn thing. So, I'm trying to get quicker.
One of the reasons I enjoy having you on and watching your career is that you're still working full time, and you get up. What time do you get up?
4:30.
Is that later than it used to be? I feel like you used to get up even earlier.
Well, sometimes we have to get up a little earlier, but
I'd get emails.
Buddy goes in earlier.
We'd be beta reading or whatever, and I'd get emails marked at 2 a.m. my time, and I'm just
right.
Like, what is she doing up? Yeah, so you're working full time, you've got kids, and you're still managing. How many novels do you have now? About 10 or so?
Sure sign you're a good author right there. You have to think about it.
We can't remember. Yeah, don't ask me. I don't know. Hang on a minute. No, I think about 18.
Yeah, because like you were saying, those novellas, some of them are as big as the novel. And I know a lot of the final formula ones were like 100,000 words or more.
Yeah, all the main books were at least 100,000. And the last one was 120. So,
do you have any tips for other authors? Because I actually use you as an example, because I know you would be like at your kids' sporting events, sitting over there writing longhand on the side. As someone who's able to, you've been doing this now for almost as long as I have. Was it 2011 or 12 when you published your first?
I actually didn't publish until 2013, but we were in the workshop together. I had the book written. I think you kind of kicked me in the behind and told me to go publish the darn thing because I was being a chicken. But yeah, we've been at it about the same amount of time. But oh yeah, I take the laptop, the notebook everywhere. I mean, we're always, I got, soccer practice, basketball practice. Kind of hard to do it at the games because, I want to watch those. But, road trips, my daughter now plays travel basketball and all the games are 2 hours away. So that at least gives you some writing time while you're on the road. But it's not as easy as sitting at home in the quiet.
Yeah, if it was me, I would have to take Dramamine before attempting to do. I do that on airplanes because you can get a lot done when you're a captive. Like you can't go anywhere. You might as well work. But do you have any other tips for other people who are trying to really just only have like 15 minutes or 30 minutes here and there to squeeze it in and get those novels written?
Yeah, you just got to train yourself. It's, you look at the clock, I've got 15 minutes, it's go time, and I'm a daydreamer. So I'm always, thinking ahead. I got that, the story movies going in my mind, I'm thinking about the next scene, every chance I get. So if I actually get a moment to write it down, then, I'm ready to go. So, it depends on the person, and I'm able to block out distractions or people talking to me. And my husband just walked through the room and looked at me like, oh yeah, that's true. But so it's a gift, as far as ignoring people, I mean.
That's good. Yeah. And I remember I don't have kids, but I was on swim team as a kid. And I remember my poor parents having to drive me all over the West Coast for meets and all those. My mom was so happy when I got old enough to drive myself to practice.
Oh yeah.
But that's a good time to write, it seems like.
Yes.
Now, and another reason I like having you on is you're not writing to market. As we've discovered, you're not really paying attention to tropes. You're kind of doing your own thing. And you've certainly had some success. I don't know if you're thinking about switching full-time to writing at some point, but I know you've done well for yourself with your books, and by not necessarily doing right to market or anything like that, it's encouraging that, and this is such a niche, you're saying like it's unique, which is kind of the thing that agents want. They're always like, give me something I haven't seen before, but we've kind of found it's easier to sell, like probably London Steampunk, and the thing that people have read 10 million of them and they want another one. So it's cool that you are doing something unique and selling it. And I guess that can lead us into talking about marketing a bit.
Yes, yes.
I know this is your favorite thing to talk about.
Oh, yes.
I know you think you haven't done that much, but you did some unique things with this new series. You were in that box set. We actually had Gwen White on about a year ago talking about this big multi-author box set. Do you want to talk about how you got involved in that? And you actually launched your book in the box set, right? Before
Yes.
like 6 months before you published it as a standalone. So
Right.
how did that all go?
Well, actually, Gwen was the one that asked me if I wanted to be in it. And that was my first time I've ever been in a thing like that. I usually sit over here by myself at a soccer game, writing. So it was a neat experience. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I mean, as we'll get into here, I don't do a huge amount of marketing. And so they just, these people do. And I just learned so much by watching what they did, and just a great group of people to work with. And like you said, that was the first book in the Iron Soul series. And I was at the point where I was ready to start a new series. So that was my thought process, because of, what I chose for that. And it worked out well, I think. It was in the box set for 4 months, which I'm, slow writer. It gave me a chance to get the next 2 books going. So I was able to do a rapid release once I got the first book back. But while it was in the box set, a lot of folks tell you to have, your next book up on pre-order. I'm a bit of a chicken with that. I'm just so afraid I'll miss a deadline or Amazon will upload the wrong file. So I was kind of leery of doing that. So what I did was I had a page on my website that, was linked to the end of the book. And I put the cover of my next book up there. And once I had the blurb, I put the blurb up, because that's a nice thing about that. I can change it at any time. And of course, the link to my newsletter said, hey, if you like the first book, sign up for the newsletter, and I'll let you know when the next one's available. And that seemed to work really well. I had loads of people sign up for the newsletter, more than I ever did, at one time in the past. So that told me people were maybe actually reading the book. So that was cool, because when it's in something like that, it's so hard to judge, are people really reading my book? Or, the reviews might just say, oh, it was great, but okay, whose book was great? Did you actually read my book? So that was neat.
It's good to hear that it helped, because I think my reaction was, oh, no way would I write like an original something, a whole novel for a box set, because I assume you guys made a little money, but you were splitting it 20 ways, and I think you were selling it for 99 cents. Although
Right.
that one was in Kindle Unlimited, maybe before they cut the page, they cut it down to like 3,000 pages read is the max you could get credit for. But if back in the day, if you had a 10,000 page box set that people went all the way through, that could be some pretty big money.
Yeah, I believe they made back what was put in it, but it wasn't really a money maker. I think folks were mainly in it like to make a list, that kind of thing. For me personally, yeah, I wanted to just find more readers. I had never been in a box set like that before. I wanted to give it a try. So that was my thought process behind it. Everybody gets in these things, for a different reason. And as far as, launching a first book, that wasn't, again, boy, I planned stuff so well, but it wasn't my thought behind it. That was the book I was ready to write next. So that's the next book. That's what I threw in there. So, and it was supposed to be something original. So there you go.
It's like I was saying, it makes me feel like I would never do that. But then at the same time, I've totally written a book one and like the first 3 books, and with the plan of just giving the first one away for free anyway to get people into the series. So I guess it's not much different than immediately making your first book free, or maybe 99 cents as a loss leader. Do you know the stats on that box set about how many you guys gave or sold in the end?
Don't quote me on it, but I was thinking it was like 30,000 copies. But I could be wrong. I'd have to ask them and see, because I didn't really hear the final numbers, but it did really well.
Yeah, that's an impressive number. And you did have about 20 authors in it,
Yeah, I think it was 23, and then there was a couple of books that had dual authors, so there might have been like a grand total 25, 26, somewhere in that range.
It's cool that you got a bunch of email signups, because as an outsider looking in, I would have been wondering how many people actually go through this whole 20 book set, and try all the books in the set.
Yeah, that was me too. So I was really pleased to see that. And I'm glad I put that in there, so as a way to judge whether people really read the book or not.
Well, I know you've said you don't pay a whole lot of attention to the marketing trends and stuff, but now that you've been kind of paying attention to the scene and publishing for several years, are there any thoughts on like launching this series versus launching your last one? Have things changed a lot, and did you have different expectations, and have they lived up to them?
Well, something that I did different with this one, once I got the first book back, was I put it in Kindle Unlimited. I've always been wide. I've never tried it. And honestly, I just did it to try it, because I don't know anymore. You get on there, you look at the lists, and it just seems to me all the books are in Kindle Unlimited. And back in, say, 2014, when I published my second book, holy smokes, that sucker shot up there. It sat on the list forever. That was just awesome. And then now, at the end of the Final Formula series, that last book, I published it, and it was just like, there it was, and it died. I'm like, oh, this is depressing. So I decided to give Kindle Unlimited a try. Honestly, because you can't really judge, now that it's passed, whether I would have done better if I'd gone the other way. But it's held its own. It seemed to do pretty well, hung out, on its list, of course, a little smaller, the steampunk list and, those kind. But it hung out there for quite a while, so I think it did well. But how much, Kindle Unlimited really helped or not, I can't say. Honestly, there's some days I sell more than I have page reads, so that might be a product of my audience, so, because I've always been wide.
One of the scary things about being an author, particularly at like this point in history where things are changing incredibly rapidly, is as you watch the performance of books, you start to wonder, like, okay, is it not doing it like it used to because the market is different, because the audience is different, because of something about me, because of something about the algorithm? It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And just to segue into the question that I had, when you're a full-time author and you're depending upon the book sales for income, sometimes you can sort of live and die by the numbers. Like you're staring at the numbers on a daily, or when I was starting out, like sort of on an hourly basis, I would go back and see if the numbers had changed. When you're not a full-time author, you can sort of afford to not worry too much about that sort of thing. And it sounds like you do track your sales pretty closely.
Yes, I agree. I don't, because my income does not depend on it, I don't stress over it too much. Yes, it bothers me if the book's kind of sucking it up at the moment, and because I'm such a slow writer anyway, I don't check them religiously except kind of initially, or if I got a promo going on or something like that, they kind of want to know the numbers. But when you get down to the end of that 3-month period and I'm kind of coming up on a release and the other book's been out for a while, honestly, I don't even look because I don't want to know because I can't do anything about it. I write the next book. This is just how it has to be. So
that's another funny thing about being an author, where it's like at some point it's like, well, I didn't do anything. So if I look at the numbers and the numbers are bad, okay, and if the numbers are good and I didn't do anything, well, what the heck does that mean?
Yes,
So
exactly.
it's a funny thing like that. And so I mean, at least it's good that like when you do a promotion, like you're keeping track of that, because I'd never realized that the hardest part was going to be keeping track of what actually worked. Like,
yes,
you always have to monitor all of that.
Yeah, I agree, and it is really hard to judge sometimes. Did it work or did I get lucky? And who knows? It's just, it's hard to judge.
So you mentioned you don't do much marketing, but have you done some, like getting any Facebook ads, Amazon ads, anything like that?
I've just recently kind of started to dabble in those sorts of things. I started with AMS because I've already got the account. It was easy, So that's the one I've started with. I'd like to get into the others at some point, but right now I'm just trying to puzzle that out. I've tried several different ads, and I do think they're effective as far as if I turn them off, the sales drop off. So I know they're doing something, but oh my goodness, that dashboard doesn't tell you anything. So I've been trying to keep spreadsheets and all that, but I haven't puzzled it out yet, but getting better.
And well, thus far, are you at least breaking even, or what have you discovered?
Yes, and with the books being in Kindle Unlimited, it kind of gives you a little fudge factor there where, it may not look real good, but you got those mystery borrows and the page reads, and so it kind of makes up for it in that regard. But I would like to try some on like my Final Formula series, which is still wide, and the first book is permanently free, but I just kind of, I haven't yet taken the plunge just to advertise a free book. That's kind of, here, take my money. So I'm just kind of easing my way into that one.
Yeah, I think I have one running for Star Nomad, which is free, but it's one of the, we've talked about on the show before, you actually have to tinker with your Amazon ads every week or two to keep them getting a lot of impressions. And I haven't even looked at that one for a while, but I'm not a fan of that myself, of paying per click on a book that's free. I much prefer, obviously, if you can just get a BookBub, it's great. But
yes.
But even the other sponsorship sites, like we just had Fussy Librarian on here, you might get more bang for your buck from paying $30 one flat fee and then maybe getting 1,000 downloads.
Yes.
Versus maybe having to pay 25 cents a click and then they don't even necessarily download. You'd think they would, but it's still depending on if your page is set up well and draws them in and makes them want it. Yeah,
I agree with that. I just, the pay-per-click thing just, it bugs me. Which I know you gotta spend a little to make a little, but boy, that's hard. But I'm with you. I would much rather pay the BookBubs, and I'd love to have another BookBub, but those kind of services as opposed to the pay-per-click. Just me personally, just the way I think, the way I feel, but obviously they work. There's a lot of folks out there doing really well with them, and I'd like to be one eventually, but there's a bit of a learning curve there.
There is, and it depends on how much time you want to invest in it too. If it's something that's kind of fun for you and you enjoy, like figuring out how to get down to 10 cents a click, and Brian Meeks, we haven't had him on the show yet. I need to see if I can get him, but he's out there on other podcasts, and he was mentioning, it might have been at a conference, that he took someone with like an 8-book series, and they spent money on the first one, which was perma-free or free for a while. And they kind of saw it took to like book 4 before they became positive. And you had to wait like 60 days to give enough time for people to work their way through the series before judging whether or not you were making enough sales on the full price later books to justify the cost of doing the Amazon ads on the first perma-free book. So if I ever get bored or sick and I just can't write, maybe that'll be the time off. I do feel like in my case, and you too, you're getting a pretty big backlist, that if I had the interest to actually spend time mastering it, I could, you could probably make a good living just off your backlist eventually if you kept playing with the ads and keeping those book ones selling.
Oh, yeah.
But let me ask you, since you went from being wide to Kindle Unlimited, did you have a lot of disappointed readers on the other services? Because that's certainly been my experience. It's been hard to, and I'll get kind of semi-snide comments that are like, I like this author, all of her books are available on Barnes & Noble. I'm like, I'm sorry, almost all of mine are. They come out eventually to the other stores.
Right. Yeah, that was one thing that really held me back from giving it a try, was I was so afraid of, disappointing people who buy their books elsewhere. So what I did was, when like the 2 weeks before the book goes live on Amazon, I'll put it up on Smashwords, just Smashwords, nowhere else. I don't let them distribute anywhere. And I let, the fans know, hey, you can get it here because you can get it in the, the different formats, that kind of stuff. And so far, nobody's complained. I haven't had a single complaint. So I got really lucky, or that worked.
Yeah, that's good for those who are willing to purchase in other stores.
Yeah.
I've certainly found, because I've done the Patreon thing too for the last few books, to give them away a couple weeks early. Not give them, but like sell them early for those who are willing to, I think Smashwords is still, they've got to sideload it, or, it's not automatic.
Right.
And BookFunnel makes it pretty easy. That's what I use. But again, it's not quite the same as just snagging something and having it be in the cloud, always there from Barnes & Noble. You just have to update your device. That is good that you're not distributing them, because I've heard things from, we've had Christine from Kobo on here that's like, don't put it on Kobo and then take it down, please, and then come back 3 months later when KU didn't work out, because it upsets the buyers of the books, and they're very confused.
And they distribute to so many different places. Sometimes it takes them a while to pull it down elsewhere. So that's why as soon as I put it up there, I go through and click them all, don't distribute. No.
Yeah, that's a good way to work around, and at least give people the option. At least you can say like, hey, if you didn't want to do it, that's fine, but you could have.
Right. Don't yell at me. I gave you the option. So.
All right, and since you're on Amazon now, let me ask you about the categories that are kind of available for you. I think there's Gas Lamp now. What categories are you using for your books?
The main categories that I've got it in is steampunk and historical fantasy, I believe, is kind of the main ones. And then to get in the Gas Lamp, it's a keyword. So if you put Gas Lamp in your keywords, it'll go into that one as well. So I didn't actually have to use up one of my categories for that. And I also like to, even though like the historical fantasy type stuff is more competitive, if you got a new release, you're going to be on the new release list there. So I kind of don't mind it hanging out there, at least for that first 30 days. After that, I might kind of bump it down to somewhere that's not quite as competitive. So maybe it'll still be on a list somewhere, but.
All right, so I want to go back and talk about the box set release, because I was sort of interested about when you had released initially a book and exclusive to the box set, and then later on released it, individually. You sort of like, that's a rare opportunity to basically get 2 releases of the same book, and the release period of a book is the period when you sort of have the most activity. It's one of the most crucial times. So like, let's say someone is given the opportunity to sort of do this, where you'll release your book first in one way and then in the traditional way. Do you think that there's an additive effect, or is it sort of the same as though you just done the one release?
Really, it probably, in my case, it didn't help me a whole lot as far as like my second release where it's all by itself, because by that point, all my fans have already bought it. I've been plugging it for 4 months, so they've already got it. So it didn't get that big initial release bump. So I tried to do, a few little ads and that sort of thing to kind of get it rolling. But the main thing I did was put the book 2 out real quick because I already had it ready. So now it's out there, it's on the new releases, my fans are buying it. So then people start seeing it. They'll go, oh, well, let's go check out the book 1. And then I also put book 1 at 99 cents to kind of encourage folks to give it a try. So those were the things I did.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a concern I think a lot of people have. It's a valid one. Is like if you do an exclusive release of some kind, and it's really effective, and all of your fans really jump on it. Like I'm in a lot of story bundles, and that's often sort of a way that you can draw people to a story bundle is to have an exclusive release there. That you can in some ways be poaching your own sales. So I guess that's something that a lot of people are going to have to keep in mind, like when they're trying an exclusive release, is to set your expectations accordingly when the real release comes out, because the diehards have probably already got it.
Oh yeah, yes.
All right. We obviously know that having a title perma-free still is a good, viable way for the authors to get their name out there. Do you feel being included in a box set is also still a viable way to get your name out there?
Yes, I think so. Like I said, that was the only one that I've done so far. I am want to be in one like with a short story here at some point. I'm not sure exactly when yet. It's still in the works. But, like for me, I'm just looking to meet some new fans. So if I can join up with some other authors and they're all going to send it out to their newsletters and say, hey, I've got preferably something brand new. I've got this brand new story in this. You want to go check it out? And then maybe those people might look at my story too. So yeah, I think it's a good thing.
If you have enough books in the same series, have you ever considered releasing a box set of your own titles, if you haven't already done so?
Yeah, I do have a box set for the Final Formula that I included the first book, the first in-between book, the novella, and then the second book. And I also wrote a couple of short stories that I included in it. And the main reason I did that was just to give me something else to advertise, because forever I only had the one series. So I've only got the one first book. So that was the main reason why I did the box set.
I should say I actually have done this multi-author box set but first original concept with my pen name. We did novellas, so that wasn't as daunting to me as writing a whole novel. But I don't know if you had this experience, but I actually had people buy it twice because they wanted the cover art, like the cover in the individual book in their Kindle to be able to find it more easily. And I did the same thing too when I launched the novella on its own later on. I made it 99 cents for a while, and I was kind of actually surprised at how many people bought it, because I thought that everybody got the box set that was a fan. So you might have, some of your sales too might have been the same thing where
yes, I think it was. And I advertised it that way initially. That's one of the reasons I made it 99 cents, because I know a lot of folks, if you're like me, kind of anal, you like to have that, the other book, really there on your Kindle, with its cover. So I kind of made that available really quick so they can get it for cheap.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you would do this kind of thing again. Is there anything that you would do differently if you did it again? Because I have a hunch that you probably would have got even more sales if you had the pre-order up on Amazon and just linked directly to that. But I don't know, because maybe you got people in your newsletter that you might not have gotten if you didn't do that. But I think I would do that.
Oh,
here's
yeah.
book 2, you can
Absolutely.
buy it.
If you can do that, if you can meet your deadline, if you're not a chicken like me and you don't care to put the placeholder file in there, oh, that just freaks me out. I'm sorry. But, oh yeah, I think that'd definitely be the way to go. But I was really pleased with how many people signed up for the newsletter that, maybe I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. It worked out. But yeah, if I had to do it again, like I said, for me, I'm looking for fans. So new readers. So I would prefer to be in like a smaller box set where there's a greater chance of people, reading the story. Also more, everybody in the same genre kind of box set, those sorts of things. That would be my preference. But as it was, it was a real good experience for me, and I don't regret it one bit. But if I do it again, that's the things I'll be looking for.
See, that's one thing I was curious about, is like you were invited into this one, and so you didn't really have any control over the content. You were just one of the pieces of content. And do you think, like, let's say that the opportunity comes up again to either put one together on your own or to join in another one. Like, do you vet the other people that are in it at a concern of maybe a clash of different content types or inconsistent quality? Because I know sometimes there's a fight over like what position you're going to be in the book, because if there's a real stinker halfway through and you're the story after it, then you're not going to get a lot of value out of the thing. So like, how much thought should a prospective author joining a box set put into what the box set actually contains?
Oh, yeah, I would definitely look into it. When I find out what other authors are in it, I would go and look them up, check out their ratings, check out their content, maybe even read a story of theirs if you got the time. Just stuff like that. Also, another biggie is to make sure they're a good person. They're not going to go out there and do something wrong and get you in trouble. So, that's a big part of it. And which, I think is another helpful thing to do as an author is go out there and make friends with other authors, meet new people, get to know folks, and eventually maybe they'll be the ones you get together with in a box set, or just, make more buddies, because, we're not in competition there. As soon as somebody reads a book, they're ready for the next one. So it's great when you can work together, and especially with, the box sets and those sorts of things.
You previously touched on the mailing list. So my question for you is, how do you handle the mailing list for your different genres? Do you group them all together, or do you keep them separate? At
the moment, they're all together. Like I said, people seem to cross over pretty well. It's still me, it's my stories, my characters. I think if you like one thing I wrote, you're probably going to like the other, because, as far as the story aspect goes, it's really just the setting that changes. So if you can get along with something historic, then I just kept them all there together. So.
Do you have a set schedule on how often you send something out, or are you just by like new release only, that sort of thing?
Well, you can probably guess here from the way I've answered everything. Pretty much just whenever I have a new release. I'm not one to send out lots of newsletters. For me, the biggest thing is time. I just don't, I do good to get the books written. So I really don't have time to come up with great, interesting newsletters and that kind of stuff, which I wish I did. I think that would be an awesome way to interact with fans and, whatnot. I'd love to do something like that, but I just don't have time.
You definitely have to pick and choose more when you are working full-time still, and you've got a family, and you maybe only have a half hour each day to work. And I think you're doing the right thing in prioritizing writing and getting the next book out. As we were kind of talking about before, once you have a bigger backlist, you can always, there's nothing stopping you from running an advertising campaign on the book one you published 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So
right. Yeah, that's the plan.
I think a lot of people maybe try to do too much when they're very limited on time, and it's probably where the 80-20 rule is good. Kind of see what you're doing that's resulting in the most income or the most sales, or the most new people picking up your books, and be careful about not spending an hour on Twitter or
yes.
that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. You got to prioritize your time and decide what really matters to you. So that's what I tried to do.
You mentioned with your cover already that you put the canal boats on there, and I know you've got the heroine on there. Did you go and look at other historical fantasy / steampunk kind of books and see what they were doing and try to emulate that? Or did you just say like, hey, give me a fun cover? It's kind of hard when you're doing something unique. You can't just do like urban fantasy. They're like the woman in tight jeans that's got a glowing hand and you're good.
Yes, really. Yeah, I did go out and look at covers within the different genres, and I looked at the things that I liked, but I knew going in that I wanted a canal boat on the cover and I wanted a character. So that kind of came together that way. So actually, those darn canal boats, that was really hard to find pictures of that. Good thing I'm only doing 5 books, because I don't think I could find a 6th picture.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing when you choose an original and unique topic. Is like, the clip art is not. Not even clip art. The artwork is not abundant here. And it's tough to like. It feels silly to have to get an illustration of something that exists.
Yes.
But all right, so now we're talking about how you wrote in one genre and now another. And a lot of times the concern is, try to get the fans from before to flow forward to the new stuff. Have you found, like, with a new release in the new series, bumps in the backlists from people flowing in the other direction?
Yes, I have. Usually when, I've got a new release, it seems to trigger the other ones as well. So that's been good. And I kept doing what I had been doing with the box set. At the end of each book, I send them to a page on my website. I got the next cover there. Hey, sign up for my newsletter if you want to know, that kind of thing. So like I said, I'm a chicken about putting that pre-order up too soon. But at the end of that page, I've also got, I direct them to the first book in the final formula, which is free. Hey, you're looking for something else to read while you're waiting for this next book. So it seems to have worked well.
All right. Now, as someone who has written multiple genres as well, I'm curious to know if you advertise or mention all your genres in either the front or back matter of all your books, or you just say, like, for instance, if you have 5 books in one series, you just only mention the other books in the same series, or do you just assume, you've got a list of every single title you've got in every single book you've got? Kind of like letting them know, okay, if you like this book, I know it's not in the same type of genre, but give it a try anyways.
Well, I've really only got the 2. So I haven't gone back yet and added anything from my newest series to my old one. But like I said, in my new series, there at the end of each book, I send them to my website, which I do list the other ones, and I make the difference. This one's contemporary urban fantasy. This one's, historic, try to give people an idea. And also, like on the website itself, where I list the books, I list them by series, and I describe the series a little bit up front. So I try to keep them separate in that regard, so you don't just kind of stumble into it like, what the heck, it'd be something completely different.
Real quick, have you actually, like, for instance, at the end of one of your books in genre 1, do you say, hey, here's a preview of, say, chapter 1 in new type of genre here, just to see if you can get them interested? Or you just, hopefully they'll just follow you regardless of what you're doing?
I haven't done that yet. Like I said, I do need to go back and update the older books. I just haven't gotten around to it. At one time I did go and put the first chapter of the next book, or at least an excerpt of that at the end of some of the older books. But no, I haven't done that yet, which I will, but just haven't quite got around to it.
All right. I just got one last question. So, you're saying that you're very much right by the seat of your pants. Does that go just with the plot, or do you not know how far? Have you planned out how far this series is going to go, and have you even thought about what maybe the next series would be?
Yeah, that's kind of the weird thing about me. I can actually set a word count. I can set a number of books in a series and then write to that. But as far as the individual books, the plot, where it's going to, I have no clue how this story is going to end. Okay, we'll just have to wait and see. For me, writing is almost as much fun as reading because I don't know where it's going either. So I'm just really bad about that. I keep trying to be a better plotter, but it hasn't happened yet.
All right. Well, thank you for answering all our questions and staying up late, considering, are you skipping work tomorrow? I remembered you might use this as an excuse to not go in.
There we go. Any excuse.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on tonight with us. And one last question, because I'm going to ask you the name of your book so people can go check it out. We mentioned Iron Souls is the newest series. Do you have any regrets about making book 1 Pharaohmancer, which, as we warned on the show before, don't use your made-up fantasy word for the title because people won't be able to spell it or remember it. Although in your case, that's kind of like you can figure it out. It's not just something with a bunch of apostrophes in it.
Right.
Have you had any backlash on kind of making up your own
word? Believe it or not, on that one I've had a lot of positive response. People saying, oh, well, that's really cool, and I guess people can see what it means, because necromancer is pretty common, so you just stick pharaoh on there, which is iron, so it seems to work. So yes, you're right, I would be leery of, and I really thought about it before I did it, but it worked. At least so far.
All right. Well, that's good. And I think probably now people will actually remember it if they go looking it up on Amazon. But we will put it in the show notes also so people can check it out. I think you've still got it for 99 cents and
yes.
In Kindle Unlimited. And anything else you want to tell people about before we go? Where to find you online? And I know you're working on book 4 because I'm beta reading it.
That's right. Yes. Book 4 will be out in July sometime. And you can always go to my website, beccaandre.com, to find out the latest and greatest. I try to update fairly frequently.
All right, and this is episode 186 for us. So anybody, if you want to come by marketingsff.com, and I'll have the links to Becca's site and her books, and just in case you can't remember Ferromancer, which they probably will, especially now that I've talked about it for 5 minutes. But thanks again for joining us, and thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for hanging out with us. See you later.
So long, everybody.